In this video, we're going to work on updating our movement system to Unity's newer input system. So we're just going to get the new input system installed and then refactor our InputManager script and PlayerMovement script a little bit here to work with that. That way we can work with a more robust system. So we'll go ahead and get started on that right away. So to get started here, we're going to have to actually install the input system package. To do that, we're going to go to Window and then Package Manager. And then up at the top here, just make sure yours is set to Unity Registry. And then you'll just input or search for input. And then you go ahead and install this. And this is going to reset once it's installing here. So we'll come back once that's completed. So if you get this warning message here, we can go ahead and say no. So then once the editor has restarted here, we're going to go ahead and actually set up the new input system. So we can go into Edit and then Project Settings. And then we're going to go ahead and click on Player here. And then we can scroll down here to Active Input Handling underneath the Configuration section. And currently it's set just to InputManager Old. And we have an option here. We can set it to the new one only, the old one only, or we can do both. I'm going to go ahead and do both. That way, if we do want to use the old input system for some quick testing or something like that, we can go ahead and do that as well. So I'm going to say both, and then it's going to say it needs to be restarted. So then we'll go ahead and apply that. So once our editor is restarted here, the next thing that we can do is we're going to want to generate an input actions asset. So we'll go over here to our assets folder and we'll right click and click on create. And mine is all the way down here at the bottom, input actions. And I'm going to rename mine to player controls. And once we have this renamed, I'll go ahead and double click on that to open up the input actions. And so now we're going to need to create an action map. So for the first action map that we're going to use, I'm going to call this one player. And then we're going to need some actions. So currently we only have moving and jumping set up. So I'm just going to go ahead and set this first one that's already here and call that move. And then click the little plus symbol here. And that's going to create a new action. And this one we're going to call jump. And for our move action, we're going to want to set the action type over here to a value. And the control type is going to be a vector2. And then for our jump action here, we're going to do an action type of button. So we'll leave that as it is. So then here for the move, we're going to set up, if you click the little plus symbol next to the action that you created, you can add a binding. For move, we're going to click this add up, down, left, right composite. And that's going to add a 2D vector here with up, down, left, and right, for example. So then I'm just going to delete this no binding one here as we don't need it. And here is where we're going to select our key bindings. So for up, we want it to be, I'm going to use WASD. So if you want, you can just select the key that you're binding. And then over here, you can click the path. If yours kind of errors or glitches out like mine is here, you can see here that there's a little button you can click. If you click it, it's going to listen for the button that you're looking for. So you'll click that button and then you'll press the key you want. So I want W, and then I'm gonna select W, and then we'll do the same thing here for all the other keys. So WS, left is A, and right is D. And if you wanted to, you could come up here to like the 2D vector, click F2 and rename this. So this is the WASD. And then if we wanted, we could add another one. So let's say we wanted our arrow keys. So we could do arrows. And we can do the same thing here, but this time it's going to be the arrow keys. So now we can just have them both bound. And then we're going to also want to bind the jump key. So do the same thing here. And I'm just going to do this with the space keyboard. So then once we're done here, we're going to click on Save Asset. And then once that's saved, the next thing that we're going to want to do is generate the C# class. So we're going to click this little button here, and then you don't have to make any changes, and we're simply going to click on Apply. And you'll see here, now there's a C# class with the same name generated right above it. And this class is going to allow us to reference and use the input actions in our scripts. So the next thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to jump into our InputManager script so we can start refactoring the code in here. And we're essentially going to wipe out almost all of this. So we're going to start off at the top here. And the first thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to add a new using statement. And we're going to want to use using Unity engine.input system. And then here for our declarations, we're going to be changing these up. So our horizontal input, this is no longer going to be a float. This is now going to be a vector2. And to keep this so it makes more sense, we're going to actually just change this to a move input, and that's going to store the movement for us, the vector2 for when we're moving. And then our jump input can stay the same. That's going to remain a bool. And then we're also going to need to get one more thing here. And so we're going to need a reference to the input actions class. So we're going to say player controls and space, and then we're just going to say controls. That's what we're going to call it. Now that we have that done, we can go ahead and the whole update section, we're just going to go ahead and get rid of that. And we're going to need to do an awake method here instead. And so inside here, the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to get a new instance of the player controls class which is from the auto-generated class, or which is an auto-generated class from our input actions asset that we created. So here we're going to say controls equals, and this is just going to be a new player controls. And then next, we're going to want to actually assign our movement callback. And so here, I'm going to type this out, and then we can go over it as well. After I get it typed out here, I think it'll be easier to go over once it is all typed out. Okay, so this line here is going to subscribe to our move.performed event, which is inside the player action map. And then this event is going to trigger whenever the player inputs movements. So whenever they press the arrow keys or the WASD that we had set up. So this first part here, controls.player.move.performed, this is the event that we're working with. And it comes from the player's control class, which was auto-generated from our input actions asset. And then the .performed here, this is the event that activates whenever the move action is performed. So whenever our player moves, this is saying it was performed. And then here we're using a lambda expression, and then, the plus equals here, this operator attaches a listener to the event. So that way the code inside of the lambda expression will run every time the player inputs movement. And so then this part here is the lambda expression, or it's the listener that we're attaching. And then the CTX here is short for context. And this is the callback context, which is going to give us information about the input event, like the value of the input, which is going to be the value of our vector2 here. And then this part here, the read value, the CTX dot read value vector2, this is going to read our input value as a vector2. So for instance, if we're pressing W, it might return like a 0, 1 for moving upward, and a D might return 1, 0 for moving right. And then the result of this value is then going to be stored in our move input here, which will later be used in our movement logic to control the player's movement. So in short, this line is going to listen for player movement input from the player action map, and then it's going to update move input with the direction and magnitude of the movement. And then we need to do a very similar thing here, except for the next one is for when there is no movement or if it is canceled. So here we're going to do almost the exact same thing. So I'm going to copy and paste that. And then where it says .performed, we're going to say .canceled. And then where it says at the end here, after the equals, this is going to equal vector2.0. So basically this is saying there's no movement at all. So when the player stops providing input, we're setting the move input to 0 to stop their movement. And we need to do the exact same thing again for both of these, but we need to do it for our jump. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy that and paste it here. And then instead of move, this is going to be jump performed and jump canceled. And then this isn't going to be move input. This is going to be jump input. And the same here, jump input. And since jump is just a bool and not a vector2, all that we need to do here is if if it is performed, then jump is going to equal true. And if it is canceled, then it's going to equal false. And the last thing that we need to do here is set up an onEnable and onDisable methods for the input systems, just to make sure that it's properly enabled and disabled when the script or object is active or inactive in the scene. So here we're just going to say private void onEnable, and we're going to say controls player enable. And we need to do the same thing for disable as well. And if we would like, what we can do is we can do private void on disable. And then a different way that we could write this, instead of doing it like this, if we wanted to, we can do equal like this, equal greater than, and then controls.player disable. And these are the same things. This is just a way you can write a method when it only has the one line inside of it. And so these are basically just different syntaxes. This is the block syntax here, and then this is a method with the expression bodied syntax. So they're both doing the same thing. This one's just a little shorter and I think a little easier to read when you only have the one line. So I'm going to go ahead and actually delete this one and write it the same as the one below here. And so that's it for this script. And so after we save this, you'll notice here that we get an error that says the input manager doesn't have can't define the horizontal input. And that's going to be from our player movement script. So if we come over here and if we scroll down a little bit, you'll see here that we have the error message, horizontal input. So all that we have to do is we just have to change this to our move input.x. Our move input here, and we want it to be moving on the x axis for when we're moving left and right, because we're only not moving up and down here. That's why we do the .x, but that's all we have to change in here and we should be good. So now if we jump back in our editor, all that we should have to do is click on play and nothing else should have changed. So we should be able to still move left and right, and we can still jump as we could before. So that was just a quick summary here on how we could refactor our code for the new or newer input system that we can use here with Unity. And we wanted to go ahead and take care of that first before we started doing some more advanced things in setting up new actions that the player can take. So that's everything for this video. In the next video, we'll probably start on our mining, so that way we can start mining out our tiles. So we'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.